I was 10 when my world turned upside down. Losing Dad was like losing a part of myself. He wasn't just my father, he was my best friend, my hero. The house felt empty without his laughter and the stories he used to tell me every night. Mom did her best to keep things together, but it was hard for both of us. The silence in our home was a constant reminder of what we had lost. I missed Dad every day, and nothing could fill the void he left. Then, about 8 months after Dad's accident, Mom sat me down one evening. I could tell she was nervous. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Ethan, there's someone I want you to meet," she said. My heart sank. I had heard the whispers, the neighborhood gossip. Mom was seeing someone new, a man named Richard. When Richard walked into our living room, I felt a wall go up inside me. He was tall and tried to appear friendly, but I couldn't bring myself to warm up to him. "Hi, Ethan. I'm Richard. I've heard a lot about you," he said, extending his hand. I just stared at him, holding on to a photo of Dad. Richard wasn't Dad. He couldn't replace the adventures we had, the lessons Dad taught me. I couldn't accept him. Mom told me Richard would be spending more time with us. I looked up at him, searching his face for any sign that he understood what I was going through. He seemed kind, but it didn't matter. "I understand this is hard for you," Richard said gently. "I'm not here to replace anyone, Ethan. I just want to be a friend, someone you can rely on." I didn't say anything. How could he think he could just walk in and be a part of our lives? Dad's absence was still too raw, too painful. Richard's presence felt like an attempt to erase the memories of Dad, to replace him. And that was something I couldn't accept. That night, as I lay in bed, I clutched Dad's photo tightly. The future seemed uncertain and scary. Richard's arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that I didn't want to be part of. All I wanted was for things to go back to how they were when Dad was still here. I remember the day Richard moved in, like it was a bad dream that wouldn't end. Boxes and furniture cluttered our living room, each one erasing more of the home Dad and I had known. Richard was trying too hard to be friendly, but every smile, every attempt at conversation, just pushed me further away. One evening, a few weeks after he moved in, Richard sat down at the dinner table with some papers. "Ethan, I've been thinking," he began. "How about we make this official? I'd like to adopt you, make you a part of my family legally." He slid the adoption papers towards me. I felt a surge of anger. "I already have a family, and you're not it," I snapped. Mom's face fell, and Richard looked like I had just slapped him. But I couldn't hold back. This was about more than just a name. It was about loyalty to Dad, to the life we had before. The argument that night was the first of many. Mom and Richard didn't understand why I was so against the adoption, the name change. They thought it would help us become a real family. But to me, it felt like betraying Dad, erasing him from my life. The adoption attempts dragged on for months. Twice I had to speak to a judge to explain why I didn't want to be adopted, why I wanted to keep Dad's last name. Both times, the judge sided with me. Relief washed over me each time, but it also widened the gap between me and Richard. Richard couldn't hide his disappointment. "I just wanted to bring us all together, Ethan," he said one night. "I thought if you took my name, it would be a fresh start for us." But I couldn't. Dad's name was a part of me, of who I was. "It's not just a name," I told him. "It's the last piece of Dad I have. I can't give that up." Things got even more complicated when Mom and Richard had Lily, their first daughter, together. Richard tried to use her birth to bring us closer. "She's your sister, Ethan. Don't you want to share a name with her?" he asked. But it wasn't about sharing a name with Lily. It was about holding on to the past I wasn't ready to let go of. "I'm connected to Dad with this name," I said firmly. "That's more important to me." I watched as Richard and Mom whispered to each other, frustration and sadness in their eyes. I knew they were disappointed, but I couldn't be the son they wanted, not at the cost of losing my connection to Dad. That night, lying in bed, I felt more alone than ever. Part of me wanted to make Mom happy, to give Richard a chance. But another part of me, a bigger part, clung to the memories of Dad. I was torn between two worlds, and I didn't know how to bridge the gap without losing a part of myself. The arrival of Lily, my first half-sister, changed the dynamics in our house. Mom and Richard were overjoyed, and even I couldn't deny the sense of new life she brought into our home. But her presence also intensified Richard's efforts to blend our family into one. When Lily was about 6 months old, Richard sat me down for a talk. "Ethan, don't you think it's time to reconsider? Taking my name could show Lily that we're a united family," he suggested. His words hit a nerve. "I'm already part of this family, my dad's family," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Changing my name won't change that." Richard didn't understand. He thought a name was just a name, but to me, it was my identity, my connection to Dad. I couldn't let that go, not even for Lily. Mom tried to mediate, but her words felt hollow. "Ethan, we just want you to feel like you belong," she said. "But I do belong," I insisted. "I belong to Dad's family. That's not something I can just change because it makes things simpler for everyone else." The tension in our house grew with each passing day. Richard and Mom couldn't see why I was so adamant about keeping my name, my identity. They saw it as stubbornness, a refusal to move forward. When my second half-sister Emma was born 2 years later, Richard's insistence only grew stronger. He seemed to think that the more our family grew, the more I would feel the need to conform. But it had the opposite effect. I loved my sisters, Lily and Emma, but every time Richard tried to use them to convince me to change my name, I felt more alienated. It was like he was trying to erase Dad from my life completely, and I couldn't let that happen. The breaking point came when I overheard Richard talking to someone on the phone. "He's just being difficult," he said. "Eventually, he'll realize he's a part of this family, whether he likes it or not." I felt betrayed. To Richard, this was a game of persistence, of wearing me down until I gave in. But to me, it was about preserving the most important part of who I was. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The gap between me and Richard felt wider than ever. I knew I couldn't give in to his demands, but I also knew that my resistance was tearing our family apart. I was caught in a battle of wills, trying to hold on to my past while being pushed towards a future I didn't want. The year I turned 15, everything I thought I knew about my family started to unravel. It began with a casual conversation with Lily, who was then 6. "Mommy says you're lucky because you have 2 daddies," she said innocently. Her words caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Lily shrugged. "Mommy says your first daddy went away, and now you have Daddy Richard." I felt a cold anger settle in my stomach. They were rewriting history, painting a picture that erased my dad and replaced him with Richard. I confronted Mom that evening. "Why are you lying to Lily and Emma? Why are you telling them Richard is my dad?" Mom looked taken aback. "Ethan, we're just trying to make it simpler for them to understand," she explained, her voice tinged with frustration. Simpler? By lying? I couldn't hide my disbelief. They need to know about my real dad, about David. The argument that followed was bitter and painful. Mom accused me of living in the past, of not giving Richard a fair chance. I accused her of trying to erase Dad from our lives. After that night, the relationship with Mom and Richard grew more strained. I felt like a stranger in my own home, surrounded by people who didn't understand me, who didn't respect my dad's memory. The following year, when I found out they were telling people that Richard was my dad, that I was just born before they got married, I felt utterly betrayed. They had crafted a narrative that suited them, disregarding my feelings, my identity. I confronted Mom and Richard again, this time with more anger than I thought I was capable of. "You're lying to everyone," I accused. "You're trying to erase my dad from my life, from everyone's memory." Mom tried to justify it, saying it was easier than explaining the complicated truth. Richard said it was about presenting a united front as a family, but I couldn't accept their excuses. The day I graduated high school, I made a decision. I moved out. I couldn't stay in a house where my dad's existence was a footnote, where my identity was constantly under siege. Moving out was hard, but it was also a relief. I needed space, distance from the lies and the pressure. I needed to be somewhere where I could hold on to my dad's memory without it being constantly challenged. That night, in my small apartment, I felt a mix of loneliness and freedom. I had lost my family, but I had kept my identity. I had stayed true to my dad, and that was something I knew he would have been proud of. Leaving home was like stepping into unknown territory. I was free from the constant pressure to conform, to forget my dad, but I also felt unmoored, adrift without the familiar chaos of my family life. It was a time for me to figure out who I was, separate from the drama at home. I threw myself into college and part-time work, keeping busy to fill the void. I made friends, people who knew nothing about my complicated family history, which was a relief. I could just be Ethan, not the kid torn between two fathers. Then I met Sophia. She was in one of my classes, and from the first conversation, I knew she was different. She had this way of seeing right through people, understanding them. When I eventually told her about my family, she didn't offer pity or judgment, just a listening ear and a shoulder to lean on. Our relationship grew quickly, and with her, I found the peace and stability I had lost after Dad died. She became my confidant, my partner, my best friend. 2 years into our relationship, we decided to get married. It was a small ceremony, just a few close friends and Sophia's family. I didn't invite Mom, Richard, or my half-sisters. The decision was painful, but I knew their presence would bring back all the old tensions and hurts. When Sophia and I welcomed our son, Daniel, into the world, it felt like a fresh start, a chance to build the family I always wanted. We named him after my dad, but not the name everyone called him. We gave him the name Dad always wished he had, the one he wrote in his journal, dreaming of what could have been. Starting my own family brought a sense of healing, a way to honor my dad and continue his legacy. But it also reopened old wounds. Mom reached out, wanting to be a part of her grandson's life. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet up. The first time Mom and Richard saw Daniel, their reaction to his name stung. Richard couldn't hide his disappointment. "You named him after her father, but you wouldn't even consider taking my name," he remarked bitterly. I bit back a sharp reply. It was clear they still didn't understand. My son's name was a tribute to my dad, a link to the past that I cherished. Our subsequent meetings were strained, especially when my half-sisters asked why Daniel wasn't named after Richard. I tried to explain, but they parroted back the narrative Mom and Richard had fed them. It hurt, seeing how deep their lies had penetrated, shaping even the youngest minds in our family. After the last tense visit, I sent Mom and Richard a message. I made it clear that if they didn't address the girls' comments, we wouldn't see each other again. Their response was dismissive, defending the girls' right to their opinions. I ended the message exchange feeling more disillusioned than ever. I had hoped, perhaps naively, that becoming a father myself might bridge the gap between us. But it seemed the divide was too deep, the misunderstandings too entrenched. Lying in bed that night, holding Sophia's hand while Daniel slept peacefully in his crib, I wondered if I had made the right decision in letting them back into my life. The desire to connect with my family was natural, but at what cost? The peace I had found with Sophia and Daniel was precious, and I wasn't sure I was willing to risk it for a relationship that seemed doomed to misunderstanding and hurt. I had always hoped, somewhere deep inside, that one day things would get better with Mom and Richard. But each attempt to reconnect seemed to widen the rift between us. After the birth of Daniel, I felt a tug of responsibility, a need for him to know his extended family. So, despite my reservations, I initiated contact with Mom. We met a few times, each encounter a tightrope walk of managing emotions and expectations. The first meeting was the hardest. Mom and Richard's reaction to Daniel's name was like a slap in the face. It was as if they had expected me to let go of my dad's memory, to fully embrace Richard as my only father figure. Their disappointment was palpable. "You could have chosen a name that represented all of us, a new start," Richard had said, barely concealing his disdain. "It's not about you," I had replied sharply. "It's about honoring my dad, something I've been trying to do my whole life." The second and third meetings didn't fare much better. My half-sisters, now older and influenced by Mom and Richard's narrative, questioned my choice of Daniel's name. "Why didn't you name him after Daddy Richard?" one of them asked innocently yet pointedly. I tried to explain, but their young minds had been shaped by the story they had been told. To them, Richard was the wronged party, a father figure denied recognition by his stubborn stepson. The last meeting was the breaking point. Mom and Richard sat there, almost smug, as my sisters challenged my choices. It was clear they had no intention of correcting the girls' misconceptions. Afterwards, I sent them a message. I was blunt, perhaps more than I should have been. I told them that unless they were willing to respect my choices and correct the girls, there would be no more meetings, no more attempts at reconciliation. Their response was dismissive, almost taunting. They accused me of overreacting, of being childish. The girls have a right to their opinions, they said. You can't take their grandson away from them. That message hit me hard. They still saw Daniel as a pawn in our family drama, not as my son, a new life separate from our past conflicts. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling a mixture of anger and despair. I had wanted to give Daniel a sense of family, but not like this, not at the cost of our peace and dignity. Sophia found me sitting in the dark, lost in thought. She wrapped her arms around me, offering silent support. We didn't need to speak. She understood the turmoil I was in. Lying in bed that night, I realized that some bridges couldn't be mended, some gaps couldn't be bridged. I had to make a choice: continue this cycle of hurt and misunderstanding, or protect the peaceful life I had built with Sophia and Daniel. The decision weighed heavy on my heart, but as I listened to Daniel's soft breathing in the next room, I knew what I had to do. For his sake, for our family's sake, I needed to step back from the past and focus on the future we were building together. The days following my last message to Mom and Richard were filled with a mix of emotions. I felt anger, sadness, but also a sense of clarity. The decision to step back from them wasn't easy, but it felt necessary, a step towards protecting the peaceful life I had started to build with Sophia and Daniel. Sophia stood by me, her support unwavering. She didn't push me to reconcile, nor did she urge me to cut ties completely. She just listened, offering comfort and understanding. As I watched Daniel grow, his innocent laughter filling our home, I realized what I had to do. I wanted to break the cycle of hurt and misunderstanding that had overshadowed my life. I wanted Daniel to grow up in a home filled with love and peace, not the tension and conflict that had dominated my childhood. I thought about my dad a lot during those days. What would he have wanted from me? Would he have wanted me to keep fighting, to keep trying to bridge the gap with Mom and Richard? Or would he have wanted me to find my own path, to focus on the family I was building? The answer, I felt, was clear. Dad had always wanted the best for me to be happy and at peace. Holding on to anger and resentment wouldn't honor his memory. It would only tarnish it. So I made a choice. I decided to let go, to move on. I didn't cut Mom and Richard out of my life completely, but I set boundaries. I made it clear that our relationship would be on my terms, respectful of my choices and my family. I started to focus more on the present, on Sophia and Daniel. We created new traditions, made new memories. Slowly, the shadows of the past began to fade, replaced by the warmth of our present. Years passed, and though the relationship with Mom and Richard remained distant, it was civil. I occasionally sent them updates about Daniel, pictures of him growing up. They responded with polite interest, but we never regained the closeness we once had. As for my half-sisters, I tried to build a relationship with them, separate from the conflicts of the past. It wasn't easy, but over time, we found common ground. They came to understand my side of the story, and I learned to see things from their perspective. Looking back, I realized that stepping back from Mom and Richard was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made, but it was also one of the most important. It allowed me to break free from the cycle of conflict and pain to build a life that was true to myself and my values. In the end, I found peace. Peace with my past, peace with the decisions I had made. I had forged my own path, honoring my dad's memory in my own way. And in doing so, I had given Daniel a home filled with love and stability, something I had always wanted for him. And that, I knew, was the best tribute I could ever offer to my dad, ever offer to my dad, ever offer to my dad.